You know, when you look at the modern self-improvement industry, there's this underlying assumption that you're fundamentally just a work in progress.
Yeah, like you always have to be grinding.
Right,
Oh,
exactly. You've got to hustle, you've got to like peel back your trauma layer by layer, year by year, just to get to a baseline of, okay. But what if abundance and healing weren't actually something you had to achieve?
which is a huge question. What if they were something you legally inherited the second you changed your mind?
Exactly. So, welcome to the deep dive. Today we are unpacking a massive, globally influential text. It's excerpts from The Message That Works by T.L. and Daisy Osborne. And our mission today is to map out their radical framework of what they call the 7 redemptive blessings.
Yeah, we're tracking this incredible narrative arc that moves from human trauma and absolute separation all the way to a state of complete abundance.
And it really is a massive paradigm shift. So
Yeah.
whether you're coming to this deeply embedded in a faith tradition, or maybe you're just analyzing religious frameworks of success from the outside.
Right. Or you're just incredibly curious about how certain belief systems correlate with achieving like high-level career goals and financial prosperity. Because we are going to give you a comprehensive look at the architecture of mass miracle evangelism.
Yeah, we're looking objectively at a highly specific worldview to understand its mechanics, its appeal, and honestly, its psychology.
For sure. But to understand their solution, we really have to start with the problem.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack this. Before we even get into these 7 blessings, what exactly is the Osborne's diagnosis of the human condition? Like, why are people struggling, depressed, and broke in the first place?
Well, the authors argue that God originally created humanity for a literal Eden, like total unhindered abundance. But then, what they call Satan's deception, which is the trauma of the fall, it basically introduced a deadly spiritual toxin into the human experience.
So it's not just like bad luck.
Exactly. Sickness, poverty, and emotional turmoil, they aren't framed as random bad luck or just the human condition. The text argues they are direct, unavoidable consequences of this spiritual separation from the source of life.
And what really caught my eye is how they deliberately contrast this spiritual diagnosis with secular psychology. Because they aren't ignoring modern science at all.
No, they're actually pointing to its limits.
Right. They bring up a philosophy major from Brussels who observed that despite having the greatest psychological discoveries in psychoanalysis in human history, suicide rates and depression are actually higher than ever.
Yeah, they cite a Johns Hopkins psychiatrist stating that 60% of patients actually require mental and spiritual treatment rather than purely physical. It's
Yeah.
wild.
Wow, 60%.
Yeah. And the Osbournes claim that psychological infirmities, things like jealousy, pride, resentment, they actually physically destroy the body over time.
Which makes sense even from a secular perspective, honestly.
Totally. But they frame these negative emotions as ruthless forms of self-abuse that actively block personal and professional success. So it's a very striking view of the mind-body connection, but viewed entirely through a spiritual lens.
There's this one human anecdote in the material that I think really grounds this. There was a French divorcee who visited the Osborne's international headquarters in Tulsa.
Oh, right, the woman raising 2 kids by herself.
Yeah, exactly. She was dealing with the crushing trauma of raising 2 kids entirely alone, asking really heavy existential questions, wondering if her life was just a march toward final nothingness.
Which is such a dark place to be.
It really is. And her instinct, which I think mirrors the modern secular self-help mindset perfectly,
Yeah.
was that she needed to improve herself first.
Like she had to earn her way out of it.
Exactly. She felt she wasn't good enough yet to approach God or claim any sort of peace. She had to, climb the staircase of self-improvement first before she was worthy.
Which is exactly the mindset the Osbournes are trying to completely dismantle. They respond to her with a totally different framework, basically bypassing the staircase entirely.
Right.
And this brings up a crucial debate when looking at this material. Does their framework view the subsequent blessings as personal, literal promises from the divine? Or are these just, powerful metaphors for broader human potential?
That was exactly my first thought. Because a lot of secular philosophies focused on self-improvement and empowerment, they sound eerily similar, like change your mindset, change your reality.
Yeah, the whole manifestation culture.
Exactly. But I have to say, reading through their arguments, they do not treat this as a metaphor at all.
No, what's fascinating here is that they are strictly, unapologetically literal. The
Yeah.
Osborns view the death of Jesus as a substitutionary transaction, like a legal debt paid in full.
Legal exoneration.
Right. It's not a metaphor for human potential unlocking itself. It's framed as a legal exoneration that makes these blessings a literal contractual inheritance. Because the fine was paid by someone else, you mathematically cannot improve yourself to earn it.
You don't work for an inheritance.
Exactly. You just accept that the person who died left it to you.
Man, if someone actually accepts that this debt is paid, that has to completely short-circuit how they view themselves. Like, what happens to all the accumulated guilt and trauma?
It's just gone.
Right. Which leads us directly into the first three of the 7 distinct paid-for blessings. Because these first 3 really focus on reshaping the believer's internal psychological world. The first is dignity restored, or Jehovah Sidkenu. This is the concept of replacing human guilt with divine righteousness.
It is the complete and utter erasure of the inferiority complex. And just think about the psychology of that. If the debt is legally canceled, you don't have to cower, apologize for your existence, or beg for scraps anymore.
You are granted divine worth instantly.
Instantly. Which naturally paves the way for the second blessing, which is peace recovered, or Jehovah Shalom. And they make sure to note this isn't just like a warm, fuzzy feeling you get during meditation.
No, it's much deeper.
Yeah, it's an exoneration that brings absolute harmony on 3 levels. With God, with other people, and critically with yourself. You essentially stop being your own worst enemy.
I love that. And third is signals refocus, Jehovah Ra. This is the concept of God as the Good Shepherd, providing distinct, clear guidance to avoid deception and, making bad choices.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this refocused signals concept is directly tied by the Osborns to professional and financial success.
Really? How so?
Well, they argue that humanity has lost its direction because of a crafty plunderer, Satan, who scrambles our motives, making us operate out of fear, ego, or confusion.
Okay. So regarding signals refocused, it's basically like a scrambled GPS suddenly getting a clear, unblocked signal from a satellite. Suddenly you aren't guessing where to turn, you just know.
That's a great analogy.
But let me push back here for a second, because this is where the rubber meets the road. How does a theology of refocused signals actually help someone run a faltering business?
Yeah.
I mean, practically in a Monday morning meeting, how does this prevent bankruptcy?
It's a fair question. The authors actually explicitly link this internal state to business management. They mention a management professional who specializes in turning around failing businesses.
Okay, what did he say?
This professional estimated that 95% of the problems he encounters aren't actually in the business models themselves, they are in the persons who manage them.
Wow. The decision makers are the problem.
Right, they're paralyzed by anxiety or ego. So the Osborns claim that when a business manager is stabilized by these principles, when their internal signals are refocused and their inferiority complex is erased, their business dilemmas are rapidly resolved.
Because they aren't acting out of panic anymore.
Exactly. They are no longer misdirected by fear. They just make clear, confident decisions.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because I can see how erasing guilt and finding internal peace completely rewires a person's psychology. That makes total sense, even from a purely secular standpoint. A calm, confident CEO makes better choices.
Sure.
But the Osborns don't stop at inner peace. They take a hard left turn into very aggressive, controversial territory regarding the external physical world. So we move to health renewed and prosperity regained.
Yes, Jehovah Rapha and Jehovah Jireh. And
Yeah.
they come out swinging against traditional religious views on suffering.
They really do. They vehemently attack this old traditional idea that sickness is some kind of lesson in humility from God. They outright claim that Jesus bore physical diseases exactly as he bore spiritual sins.
It's a bold claim.
Very bold. But wait, we have to address common rational critiques here regarding the scientific validity of miracles and divine intervention. Because if someone is looking at a terminal diagnosis, well, secular science and medicine say one thing, and this framework says another.
Right.
How do they bridge that massive gap without it just sounding like dangerous denial?
Well, the interesting thing is they don't try to bridge it with science at all. They override it with legal theology.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, their argument is that because Jesus physically bore the stripes and punishment, the legal right of disease to exist in a believer's body has been permanently revoked.
So it's a legal issue.
Completely. It frames physical healing not as a random miracle that you desperately beg for, hoping God is in a good mood. It's a purchased right you legally claim. They view the disease as an illegal squatter on a property that has already been bought and paid for.
And they apply that exact same fierce legal logic to money, don't they?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The material aggressively attacks poverty theology. It argues that traditional religion has basically fostered a syndrome of mediocrity by historically linking poverty to piety and godliness.
To illustrate this, they used the biblical story of Moses sending the 12 spies into the Promised Land. 10 of them looked at the wealth of the land, saw the giant inhabitants, and basically said, we feel like grasshoppers, we can't do this, let's go back.
Right. It's the ultimate defeatist mindset.
But Caleb and Joshua looked at the exact same giants and the exact same land of abundance, milk, and honey and said, we are God's people, we can take it. They just refused the defeatist narrative.
They chose the abundance narrative.
But I have to lean into the discomfort of this for a second, because for a lot of modern listeners, tying spiritual enlightenment to financial wealth is highly controversial. Isn't there a massive risk here? Like, how do they address the obvious pushback about the love of money being the root of all evil?
It's a very valid critique, and the Osborns actually acknowledge it carefully. They agree that trusting in uncertain riches or hoarding wealth just for your own personal luxury is a trap. They specifically call out the danger of laying up treasure solely to enrich oneself.
Okay, so it's not just about buying a private jet.
No, not at all. They reframe wealth entirely. They argue that God created all the wealth of the earth to facilitate his work. So prosperity isn't meant for selfish indulgence. It's a divine tool.
A mandate, almost.
Yes, exactly. A mandate. You are supposed to acquire wealth to fund global evangelism, build infrastructure, and help the hurting. It completely shifts wealth from being a source of arrogant pride to being a heavy mechanism for global service.
So if someone embraces this, we have the internal world fixed. Dignity, peace, clear guidance. We have the external provision, health, and wealth as tools for service. If a person has all that, what is possibly left?
Well, the Osborns say the culmination of this entire journey is friendship resumed and victory retrieved.
Friendship resumed, Jehovah Shammah. That is about the end of existential loneliness.
Exactly. It's the answer to that French divorcee wondering if life was just final nothingness. And the imagery used here is incredibly striking. They point to the historical moment Jesus died, when the veil in the Jerusalem temple was torn in two.
Right. For context, this massive veil physically separated the people from the Holy of Holies, which was the direct presence of God. And they highlight that historians say this veil was so incredibly thick it would have required 6 yoke of oxen to physically pull it apart.
But it rips from top to bottom.
Right. It's the ultimate symbol that direct, unmediated access to God is permanently open. You don't need a priest, a guru, or a middleman anymore.
And that direct, unfiltered access leads to the final blessing, which is victory retrieved, Jehovah Nissi. The core argument here is that humanity was quite literally made to win.
Made to win.
Yeah. The believer is no longer a victim of their circumstances, their past trauma, or demonic forces. They are an absolute overcomer.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, right now? Because it sounds incredibly triumphant in theory. But if my business is actually going bankrupt today, or I'm staring at a terrifying medical bill, how on earth do I actually apply this without just living in delusion?
Yeah, how do you handle reality?
Right. How do they instruct someone to live this out when faced with crushing contradictory evidence in everyday life?
Well, this raises an important question about application versus denial, and that is where they introduce the concept of the fight of faith. And it's vital to understand what they mean by this. It's not about fighting literal demons in some cosmic tug of war.
Right, because Satan is already defeated, legally.
Exactly. In their theology, Satan is already fully legally defeated. The fight is entirely in the mind. It's the psychological fight to believe the word against all contradictory, negative evidence.
So when the rational mind says, look at the spreadsheet, this business is failing, the fight is refusing to give credit to that spreadsheet as the final spiritual truth.
Exactly. It's the active refusal to validate what they call Satan's illusions or chicanery. You maintain absolute certainty in the paid-for victory, basically treating the negative evidence as a temporary illegal trespass on property that has already been redeemed.
Wow.
You act and plan as a victor, which in turn completely changes how you tackle the failing spreadsheet.
Which brings us to the actual daily mechanics of this. We are moving from high-level theological promises to highly specific, actionable steps. If someone is buying into this, how do the Osborns instruct the believer to integrate these 7 principles into daily life and professional decision-making?
It comes down to 2 main frameworks for daily living: the seed principle and a radically redefined approach to prayer.
Okay, let's hear it.
They insist that your words, your thoughts, and your deeds are literal spiritual seeds. They procreate their own kind. So if you constantly speak about your fear, your poverty, or your trauma, you are actively planting seeds for more of that exact harvest.
They are brutally blunt about this. You cannot change others. You can only seed them for change. The change has to begin entirely inside your own vocabulary and mindset.
It's all internal first.
Right, and this completely revolutionizes how they view prayer. There's this wild story T.L. Osborne tells about himself early in his ministry. He was fasting and agonizing in prayer for 3 solid days, weeping and begging God to heal the sick.
Yes, he's pleading with God to move, and he suddenly hears a voice ask him a single question. Heal them for whom?
I love that so much. Heal them for whom? He realizes in that moment that he was begging God to do something that God had already done through Christ. He was basically asking God to heal them for us, as if God didn't care as much as he did.
It highlighted his own unbelief.
Totally.
Because of that realization, the text provides a 247 prayer guide that explicitly tells the believer to stop pleading, begging, and agonizing. Think about the logic here. If the victory is already legally paid for and the contract is signed, begging is essentially an expression of unbelief.
It's insulting to the one who paid the debt.
Exactly. Instead, prayer becomes about visualizing success, synchronizing your objectives with God's global plan, and internalizing love.
This is a massive paradigm shift.
Yeah.
It turns prayer from a desperate plea for a life preserver into, like, an executive strategy session with the CEO of the universe.
Yes.
It's no longer, please God, help me survive this board meeting. It's, let's assess these business ideas, correlate them with my identity as a winner, and execute the plan with absolute confidence.
Exactly. I love that framing. Because under this framework, you aren't entering that boardroom as a beggar hoping for a handout. You are walking in as a junior partner reviewing a legally binding contract that's already been signed.
Right.
The actionable daily step they recommend is to ruthlessly monitor your internal dialogue and your external words. You assess your ideas, you align them with the 7 redemptive blessings, and you walk into your professional and personal life acting as if the victory is assured.
You reject any defeatist mindset as an illusion designed to steal your inheritance.
Exactly.
So if we look back at the ground we've covered today, we've journeyed all the way from the deep trauma of spiritual separation through the literal legal redemption of a person's dignity, health, and wealth. We've seen how this framework meticulously builds to a triumphant life where words are literal seeds, and prayer is a visualization of inevitable victory.
And we've seen how it directly challenges both ends of the spectrum, right? It challenges traditional religious ideas that glorify poverty and suffering, and it challenges secular self-help models that rely solely on exhausting incremental human effort. It offers instead a model of radical, immediate inheritance.
Whether you view the Osborne's framework as literal divine truth, or as a fascinating psychological study in radical self-belief and empowerment, the sheer force of rejecting a defeatist mindset is incredibly compelling. It forces you to look at your own internal narratives and ask why you might be tolerating things you don't actually have to tolerate.
It demands that you ask yourself what you are actively choosing to believe about your own potential and what external evidence you are allowing to dictate your internal reality. Are you letting the spreadsheet dictate your worth, or are you dictating your worth to the spreadsheet?
Which brings us right back to those seeds. The Osbornes insist that your words and thoughts are literal seeds that will invariably produce a harvest in your physical life. If that is true, based on the silent conversations you've had with yourself today, well, what exactly are you planting?